Whoa, Dad, go, Dad.
That's right. Welcome to Whoa Dad, Go Dad. My name's Dave Momper. I'm your host. This is a fatherhood podcast for new dads and soon-to-be dads. I'm a new dad myself, and I'm asking every day, great dads, what does it take? What does it truly take to take on the ultimate role? All right, let's get to it. David Delgado, welcome to Whoa Dad, Go Dad, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Really stoked to be here.
So let's describe the good fortune of, in fact, the first person who was on my podcast. The first published episode, Mr. Mark Guay brought us together. We happen to be in a shared fatherhood group, and probably 2 months running now, 3 months.
Yeah, somewhere in between like 2.5-ish. So yeah, we started in
there.
January. Before I was a dad. So I joined the
you-
dad's group before I was in dad. And then yeah, now I'm on the other side of fatherhood. So,
Absolutely. And what a great perspective. You have a newborn less than 30 days old, roughly.
yep. You'll be 1 month or 4 weeks next Tuesday. Yeah.
Beautiful. I think it's going to be such a valuable take to have your fresh perspective on, and maybe the candid version of what it feels like to be overwhelmed and excited simultaneously. We're going to get into that. For the listeners, I want them to understand a little bit about your background, because it's pretty neat to hear what you're up to professionally as a UX designer. And I know from a design thinking standpoint, maybe there's some aspects of fatherhood in there, crafting and iterating on how you're going to raise Kai and so forth. So, and then also tell us a little bit about your coaching background and perhaps what prompted you to get into that coaching space early on in your 20s, and what your role is for your clients at this point.
Sure.
Life.
Happy to share all that. So I kind of have a dual occupation, which I'll get into how that bleeds into fatherhood and what that looks like as a dad. But one of which is a UX designer at a HR tech company. So I lead small teams to create products mostly around coaching and performance management. And I've been doing that since like 2017, more or less. And before that, back in the day, when web designer was still a career, like I used to do that, like graphic design, web designer, and then more software development. My coaching is, you could consider it like functional medicine coaching meets more kind of esoteric, shamanic, personal development work. And basically that came about as a result of experiencing kind of mysterious, chronic fatigue and brain fog in my mid-20s for multiple years on end. I basically spent from the years 2014 to 2016 going from doctor to doctor, getting no answers. I was in a lot of medical debt at the time, and I was only 24, 25 years old, and I had to take nearly a year off of work. And this was sort of my kind of blessing in a disguise in many ways, because this prompted me to really slow down, reevaluate my life. There was 2 phases of this healing journey. The first one was physiological. So there were physiological issues there, like heavy metal toxicity. I had an MTHFR gene mutation, which was exacerbated by the vegan diet that I was on at the time, and a few other things. And so that got addressed. And then the second leg of that journey was largely, emotional and spiritual. So addressing a lot of the, wounds that I had from my childhood and adolescence that I hadn't really processed, and energetically, these were lodged in my body. So it was a kind of the psycho-spiritual aspect of it lasted a lot longer for sure. But that's what got me into, meditation, breath work, psychedelics, and just personal development as a whole. And basically what I wanted to do is offer the kind of practice that I wish I had at the outset of my journey, because I had to meet with a lot of different people, whether they be functional medicine practitioners, acupuncturists, herbalists, and then eventually kind of, I don't know, people in ecstatic dance, et cetera, and connect all these dots. And so I wanted to create a place that for people that were suffering from similar things, like kind of mysterious, basically diseases with no names, that they can go to one place and get a truly holistic protocol that combines functional medicine lab testing with, Ayurveda, with you know, different meditation, breath work, hypnosis type techniques all in one place. So that's something I've been doing for about almost 3 years now. And I've been a mix of like one-on-one practice, corporate clients, public speaking, and more. And now I'm trying to fit that. I've learned a lot doing one-on-one coaching, and I'm trying to create a new offering that allows me to impact more people with this style of work.
Wow, transformative. You've seen the struggles, and you've it sounds like you've come out on the other side feeling
Mm.
vigorous and vibrant and ready to take on this amazing role called fatherhood. Is that fair to say?
It is. I mean, how I got to fatherhood is like its own story, I would say. Um, but yeah, I didn't. Fatherhood is something that I feel called upon me in many ways. It wasn't something that really was seeking out directly, even though we did have a planned pregnancy. Um, but it honestly makes so much sense, in retrospect. That so, but it wasn't really in my immediate plan per se.
Tell me a little bit more about that. It makes so much sense. What does that mean for you, David?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say that so I probably talked about becoming a parent for close to 3 years before we started. So just for context, I've been with my partner. We're legally married, but we just refer to each other as partner. Um, so we've been together for 12 years, actually. So in February of 2012 is when we met. We've been married since 2015. And honestly, I was really happy just being in partnership. I felt like we were the kind of couple that could easily just be in partnership for 20 or 30 years. And I really didn't relate to what a lot of other couples when they would said like, oh, it's a, you know, kids like kind of bring something new to the mix, or people would even describe their relationship as boring, after a while if they didn't proceed to have family. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but I just didn't relate to that particular experience. And yeah, for me, it was something that felt like it was initiated by Jing, my partner originally, and I definitely had resistance because for me, what I witnessed in my own childhood, and this wasn't obvious, but basically, I had a sister with special needs who was born with HIV, who she contracted it from my mother. And so actually, and then my parents got divorced because my father just couldn't handle that. He had a child with AIDS basically, and it just really took a huge toll on him because in his mind, he pretty much buried her the day that he found out that she had AIDS. So he was like, okay, she's gonna die in the next couple years. And I have a distinct memory of seeing my own father on his knees at my sister's cradle, crying, just bawling his eyes out, like just pretty much, assuming like, okay, she's done. It's just a matter of time, but before she dies. And so I kind of developed a limiting belief of sorts where I associated like the introduction of a child into a relationship as something destructive because I witnessed like as soon as my sister was born, my, you know, pretty much my family structure was like just exploded. Like pretty much my dad left and he got remarried within a year. And then kind of just had started to have his own life and then eventually, another set of kids. But that's something that wasn't obvious to me in the beginning. Like when we were talking about parenting, at first it was just simply like, yeah, I'm just not really interested in it. Like I don't need it to have a fulfilling life. And as I started to unpack like what this what was really going on there, um, there was a lot of fear and a lot of terror of like losing, like, having a child was at the expense of my relationship with Jing. And so I didn't really make that connection. From there, like I kind of, there was like more superficial reasons, but I started to really see that um, our intentions for bringing a life into this world were very genuine. Like we had a desire to be a parent in a very creative way. And we had multiple conversations on how we would show up as parents, what we would do different, what we don't like about the parental figures around us. One important thing for us was like, we live in New York City, and we wanted to stay, in a city or urban environment. And so having that conversation of, how many kids do we want to have? Do we want to mirror like other parents around us that moved really far away? What impact did that have on their lives, let's say career or social lives, or just overall well-being? So a lot of those conversations started to reinforce like, oh, I'm with the right person, like I have the right co-pilot. We have a really special connection because having a child is not just about having a child. Like you have to really be with the right person to have a child because your relationship is really the bedrock of who you are as parents. And it is a challenging ride for sure. Even the pregnancy alone can be very challenging. Um, so you really need like a very strong partner in this journey, I would say, and particularly as someone who was basically raised by a single working mom. Like I know how hard that is to do on your own, and I certainly didn't want that for Kai, our son. So, and then there was like another push in that direction, which actually came in early 2023, and it actually came as a result of a psilocybin ceremony that I did with a few friends of mine. So we went upstate, had two beautiful ceremonies, and there's a lot of teachings that the medicine gave me. But one of the big takeaways from the medicine was this phrase: "Don't stop the cycle of life." And it was kind of in short, like basically simply said, like, let go of your resistance and just allow it to come through. Just it's fine. It's safe. And so it was from that point, like we agreed that we wanted to um, have a child, first of all. And I said, okay. And, my wife is Chinese. So we were looking at the zodiacs and we're like, oh, I was born in the year of the dragon. I think it'd be cool to have our child in the year of the dragon. So that means we would start around May, approximately. So, um, there was more that went on in that psilocybin journey, but that was one of the takeaways that really somatically unlocked much of my resistance and fear and kind of those managing and overthinking parts of me, to just kind of surrender to the process. And we conceived like a month later. We started in late May, and shoot by early July, Jing was pregnant. So I mean, I feel that it was just meant to be. Like he's absolutely meant to be here. So, and then he was born. There's more to say around the timing, but February is a very important. February and the year of the dragon are very important times in our lives because I met my partner February 12th of 2012, which was also the year of the dragon. I was born in the year of the dragon. My sister passed away in 2000, and her birthday was February 14th. And then we conceived our son February 27th, also in the year of the dragon. So there's kind of like a lot of it. It's like this. The second month of the year of the dragon is this portal for my life, or it has proven to be so far. We'll see what
Mhm.
happens when I'm 48. But in the next one, but so far there's kind of like this very clear cyclical nature that's tied to it.
What is the year of the dragon, by the way? Is that 83?
88. So
88.
yeah,
88.
I'm
Math wrong.
35 going 36. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love how thoughtful and intentional and deliberate, and that's not always possible. So amazing
No,
and
no, it's not. I mean, we're
fortu-
very blessed. So
very, very, yeah, fortuitous that you pulled it off. And I mean, I literally got shivers when you said, "Don't stop the cycle of life." I mean, it
yeah,
just rippled through me. Wow,
yeah, yeah.
profound. And I feel like the the David Delgado I've had the honor of getting to know over the you know 2 months of Saturdays, every other Saturday is pretty. You're very thoughtful about literally how you think. You're thoughtful about how you think, and you're thoughtful about how you speak and articulate and how you're processing the world. It's just so neat and inspiring to hear you describe this journey. And I had sent you the prompt. What does it mean to be a legendary father? And I want to read it to you, and then I want to hear a little bit about how you're going to bring this to life with Kai, with
Sure.
everything you just said in mind. But your response was setting an example for what it means to be a conscious, self actualized man and compassionately empowering your children with the tools to embody the truest expression of themselves upon the core foundational values you impart.
Mm,
Remember writing that?
I do. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
I
good,
do.
good.
I do. I
It was
do.
just it was recent. that's uh that's a very that's a very thoughtful answer to that question. So I'm wondering how does that look in the first couple moments of Kai's life, the first month of Kai's life? Have you just been absorbing his newness, or is there some aspect of setting an example, being conscious, actually already imparting these values and these the spirit, the sentiments on him? How are you approaching that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel right now a lot of the initial phases of for fatherhood, at least this past month, for me have been a lot of learning kind of the 3D mechanical stuff. Like, my daddy's superpower right now is burping. Like I can get any gas out of this kid. Like, and that comes in very handy, obviously. As far as, setting an example, I try and ritualize a lot of aspects of his life. So while, for example, at 8 a.m., Jing breastfeeds Kai. So Kai's the name of my son. And so I'll go in and support by, playing some music, and I meditate and do my morning practice or some part of my morning practice in his room in front of him. So I kind of want to expose him to little things like, how we have dinner. Like I know he can't understand language, but we say before we eat food, I have like kind of a gratitude, or we say grace in a particular way where we thank the plants, animals, hands, hearts, and souls that touched our food to
Mm,
invite the food to nourish us. And just kind of having these small rituals, I think starts to set the tone for the kind of household we are. And I want him to kind of see me and how I show up just as a man, even if it's just in our apartment so far. Um, in the past couple days, since he's now able to play and we're able to stimulate him, and he's the kind of person so far that likes to observe and be awake and look at the world, um, which in turn means the person he's going to observe the most is going to be me, meaning he's going to point out or identify all of my shadows and all of the nooks and crannies of my psyche that remain unexamined by me. And they're going to be, probably extremely obvious to him, which is kind of because I can tell he's a very observant child. It actually is a wake up call for me that, oh, I have to like level up. Like, you can't bullshit this kid. Like, he's going to see right through you. Like, even if you like show up and you're not, a little present, like if let's say you're watching TV while feeding him, he even starts to make a noise. He's like, no, eye contact. Like, I want you to be here with me, kind of
mm,
thing. Um, but yeah, in the initial phases, I really think it's knowing when to impart which teachings when. Like I think, that statement came from more of the bigger picture of fatherhood. And I think in the beginning, a lot of it comes down to like, do I see my son and can I read his needs and get his needs met?
mm,
And I think that's really that's pretty challenging in the beginning because they can't speak and whatnot. And my hope is to be able to see them emotionally, of course, when they're older and have much more a much more nuanced emotional experience. But right now, it's still training as far as like, am I really seeing Kai in his experience? Do I really like when he cries? Do I look at it from a selfish perspective and be like, oh, relative to my need to complete this task, you're kind of a pain in the ass right now. This is
mhm,
disruptive. Or do I meet it with compassion, being like, oh, thank you for voicing your needs. Like, I appreciate that you're letting me know that something needs to be met, and I really want to meet you. And how long can you maintain that open container? And because all of our patience is going to wear thin, especially if you have like a child screaming in your ear for 30 or 40 minutes straight, which does happen. So, so I think a lot of it is trying to really see him and train myself to understand his needs, even if he can't voice them. And so that I think that's kind of the bigger thing. And on a less, or I suppose on a more practical level, obviously, if I'm able to meet his needs and observe him and really see him in his day to day, then that obviously makes our lives easier as parents. Um, but each day I am noticing some shifts of like what he enjoys. Some days he's more awake. Some days he likes play gym and cards. Some days he likes to hang out outside a lot more, like just in the living room and kitchen. He doesn't need anything. So, um, yeah, it's always evolving. And I do feel that as a father, it's really easy because I noticed like there was a few days, I think almost a week, that I just kind of like stepped back. I was kind of like, okay, like, we have some childcare. My wife's breastfeeding him, and it's really easy to kind of be like, okay, well, I'm just gonna like do some house chores and go to work and just do the typical like dad, like kind of paternal figure type of stuff. And I had to like check myself, like in the sense that, I think I'm like checking out a little bit here and not
Mm,
really showing up very fully. Like I'm just kind of being avoidant a little bit and saying like, okay, well, I'm not as good as my wife is this stuff. Because there was a few times where my son, it felt like, my wounded parts felt like I was rejected by him. Where like I would hold him, he was like upset, and then he goes to mom, he's like he's happier. So I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna like go be useful in some other way.
mm,
But I had to kind of really bring myself back and be like, okay, like no, we have to be able to read his needs and show up and be nurturing as well. Um, Even though this may not seem like the highlight of father in terms of when someone needs their father as much as maybe in later years. So
no
yeah.
doubt. That's good stuff, man. I'm excited
Mm.
to see the next couple of months unfold for you. Just after 1 month,
Same.
for you to have these observations and to be this attuned to Kai and to notice
Mhm.
these things is pretty special. I'm really impressed by
Mm.
your approach to things. In that response, you had noted uh, empowering your children with the tools to embody the truest expression of themselves.
Mm.
What are some of those tools over the next 5 years or the next 10 years, maybe even into their teenage
Mm.
years, being the man that you are, knowing the coaching background you have, knowing the design background that you have, knowing that you're um, intentional in your manhood, in your fatherhood. What are you anticipating are some of the key tools that you're going to bring forth for Kai?
Yeah, I think when I reflect on my own childhood, one of my I wrote this down actually a while ago is what are my commitments, to Kai? And one of them is I give you permission to be different than me.
Hmm,
And actually, as I say that, I'm like, "Phew," a lot actually comes up because I wasn't really given a lot of like who I was heavily shamed actually in my households, you know, in my family system, you could say. And as far as the tools, I think there's a couple different things. And, a lot of coaching kind of boils down, or a lot of just personal development boils down to understanding who you are at an egoic level. I'm not talking about like as God consciousness or something like that. Just simply knowing who you are, like what is your personality type, what are your strengths, how to play into those strengths, and then knowing what you want. And life is a lot easier if you really know yourself deeply and you know what you want out of life. And so assisting Kai in understanding himself, one of the ways that I plan to do that is I'm actually creating like a private, effectively like a private podcast for him. So I created a welcome video and then it's called Conversations with Kai. And it's a lot of like lessons that I wish I was taught. I'm also sharing stuff about my own struggles so he could also understand me. So I think a lot of us deep down really desire to be known deeply. And so I would hope that, he would also know me deeply, but also get some context around his own life and just kind of, just things that I've learned along the way, so he can listen to it at some point in his life.
incredible.
Um, and also it fulfills my need because there's so many conversations I want to have with him, and I'm not going to be able to have those for a very long period of time. but as long as they're fresh in my mind, I want to document them somewhere. And you never know what happens. Like I could die, and then we'll never have those conversations. And I think that that would be such a tragedy. So at least having them somewhere is really important. So I think emotional awareness is a really important skill for sure. Like, how do you relate to your experience? So right now, he's relating to experience through, you know, through sometimes throwing tantrums or crying or whatever. And so how to relate to your emotions, how to be in relationship with other humans. That's another skill that like is not taught in school. And the most important person to be in relationship with is of course yourself. So there's that aspect. Um, and I feel like a lot of the hard skills, like, I've learned like a million different design software, coding languages, and it's always going to change. So I feel like that stuff, and especially with AI, everything's going to change even more. But being able to having the skill of learning, like learning how to learn effectively,
Mhm.
is another thing that I want to pass down so that he's really empowered that if he wanted to pivot his career or pick up a new skill, that he has the foundation and the self-confidence to be like, oh, I could do that. Like that's fine. And to be resilient. Another thing that I think is really important is I was never taught about money at all. And even though my father actually invested in real estate and was very focused on his career, I feel that he really fell short when it came to teaching his kids about money. And I think that while not teaching his kids about money while expecting them to be financially abundant and performing well in that sphere of life. I think that the first 5 to 10 years of my adulthood, I really struggled because I didn't have good role models growing up around money. Like my mom is a very frivolous spender and just never really taught me about like taxes or 401k or budgeting or anything like that. So really kind of teaching Kai how to navigate financial energy and really imparting the most important thing about finances, which is that money can buy so much better things than just materials. So, in other words, like money actually is a vehicle for inner peace, spaciousness, and depending on how you use it. So, and then obviously there's very technical aspects of how you navigate money. But I do feel that that's something that is very important and shouldn't be shied away from. So yeah, so I would say like the personal growth, finances, understanding himself. I'm also like I journal pretty regularly, so I've created a notebook around observations for Kai, so that like a lot of times I notice that when you're doing personal development work and coaching, you're basically unlearning a lot of the conditioning that was added on top of you throughout childhood and adolescence in order to get to the core of who you are, which many times was visible when you were a child, but then became diluted because of peer pressure, because people discouraged you from showing up fully, because you didn't have the resources, whatever. So if Kai were ever to ask me, like, oh, what was I like? What were my interests? Where did I find awe and wonder? Like I would actually have an answer.
Mhm.
So kind of having these like documents, oh, this is like what you gravitate towards. This is like where you're following your bliss, kind of all this like kind of unadulterated pre-cognitive um insights that you can have on a person. So that's kind of the it so
Beautiful.
far.
And to carry that in through, till his, say, his 18th birthday, those observations, or, that's, it's an amazing gesture, frankly. And the amount of time and focus that it takes, I want to commend you on that, but I just think about how powerful that will be after there's this, you know, decades of aggregated observations for him to reflect on and to say, "Oh, is that who I really was?" Interesting. I guess Kai will have to take ownership and agency of it, but it'd be really
Yeah.
fun. I'm just picturing if my folks had, although they have the baby books and all the little swag from being a kiddo in school, and little notes I made and drawings I had, and I suppose they're in a bin in either my possession or their possession still. It's transferred hands over the years.
Mm.
It's fun to go back and reflect on that, to actually for myself tap into who was I back then? Who was I really? And where did the dilution take place, if it did take place? I'm thinking about knowing that we started our friendship before you were a dad, uh, but it's also very fresh. So this is such a treat to have this conversation, to hear more and more about
Mm,
you. What was your mindset before Kai was actually on the earthly side of things? What was your mindset as a father? What were you excited about? What were you worried about? Say January 1st. It's a new year.
yeah.
How did you think about fatherhood at that point? And then if you can contrast it since he's arrived. So just start with how you were January 1. What was your disposition? What was your attitude? What was
Yeah,
your
yeah.
energy
So,
level? What was on your mind?
so January 1st, so we bought an apartment and had a baby at the same time. It's not something I recommend doing, but that's how the universe unfolded. Um, that's just how it happened. So January 1st, I was feeling what I was feeling excited about was this creative process around fatherhood, around, Jing and I both come from a background of, we don't really have a religion, for example. And so, I mean, her parents are Confucian Buddhist. So Buddhism would be the only real religion in our family. Um, just kind of cool, I think, on some level, like we're like legitimately Buddhist.
Yeah.
And I would say like I really like the creative process of parenting. I was very excited about the idea of creating our own rituals because we have this clean slate. Like we're not basically recreating, the traditions of our family because there aren't that many, and the ones that are, I think, aren't very profound. Um, so I really enjoy that aspect of fatherhood. I was very, very much looking forward to like the naming process, thinking about like what are like the values of our family. This is where like the design thinking comes into play of like, I even did a little workshop of like, oh, what are our core values as a family, stuff like that. Um, so I get very excited around that kind of stuff, around education, thinking about like, stuff like way down the road. Um, I'm very excited about the prospects of like, traveling and taking Kai around the world. Like I've, had the pleasure to live in multiple countries, and I think that that's been probably the most important education I've ever gotten. I mean, there's stuff that like, I just compare to like a lot of other people in my family and even the other people like my half siblings and stuff. And yeah, I mean, what I learned just living on my own in China at like 22, like can't be taught in school. Like you just
Okay.
can't, you know? Um, so yeah, so really excited to share a lot of that. And then what I was least excited about, you could say, or fearful towards, is actually the stage that I'm in right now, which is kind of like, frankly, like before I was a dad, like I didn't have much exposure to babies. Like there was no, I'm way older than my half siblings. I never like took care of babies. I don't have like cousins that are really young. So, so yeah, so being around babies was very foreign, and babies just never really pulled on my heartstrings a lot. Like I don't have anything, there's nothing wrong with them. I have no issues with them, but I also know people that are single and have babies all over their Instagram feed somehow. And I'm about to become a dad, and there's nothing about babies on my social media, like, at all, as an example.
Sure.
So I felt really scared around the prospect of what if I don't like fatherhood? Like, what if I don't like this first phase? What if I'm not into my own child? Like, I guess I'm more realist in this perspective. So, because it was more possible. So I felt scared around like the diaper changing, um, the horror stories you hear about parenting, like the sleepless nights, the dissolution of your relationship with your partner. If you spend 10 minutes on Reddit to discuss and, under like regretting parenting threads, like you see some pretty terrifying stuff in there. And I didn't look at these on January 1st. Part of my exercise in evaluating whether I wanted to be a parent like 4 years ago involved actually going, through those avenues and seeing, okay, are there people that regret this decision? So that a lot of that stuff was present for sure. And on the other side of that, I feel that my affection is building for Kai. I mean, it was definitely there the first day, but I noticed that I feel like I enjoy it actually. Like I enjoy being in his presence. I also enjoy my time, to myself and working. So I found a pretty good balance so far. But I am, enjoying the ritual of even changing his diaper and watching him grow each day and all of that. So it's actually been a very expansive experience. But that being said, I feel a lot of that has to do because is in part because of the preliminary work that my partner and I did beforehand to really like talk things out. Like, we're sensitive to each other's nervous systems. Like I can see like when she's reaching her edge and I like take over. And then same thing for us. Like we know how to get our needs met. Um, so yeah, so I think that's helped a lot. So a lot of the catastrophizing that I was doing so far has not come to fruition. Like I really um really enjoyed for the most part. So
And how about those first few days? What was it like to be David Delgado those first few days? New dad, tiny little nugget. You're in the city. What I loved, by the way, because of our group fatherhood chat,
yeah.
you took an Uber from the hospital home. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's right.
And we,
Yeah.
that, to me, that's just, yeah, I guess you could do that in Denver, but that's just not how we'd roll. But that's how you roll. So what was it like? All these little
Oh
first time
man.
experiences and what was on your mind the first 48 hours of
Oh
father?
yeah. Yeah, I mean the birth story is a whole other thing, but yeah, the first 48 hours were pretty wild. So the birth itself was 40 hours long, very, very long labor. Ended up being a vaginal birth, which was our intentions. Beautiful experience at the end. Absolutely worth the wait from my perspective. If you ask Jing, maybe she'll have a different perspective, but I think she feels similarly. Um, but first 40 hours were really weird because we were mostly still in the hospital. And so I didn't really feel like I was in our cocoon just yet. Um, I didn't really sleep a lot either of those nights, and I was coming down off the adrenaline of the 40-hour birth because I already hadn't slept that much for, 2 days. So it was just pretty wild. I felt like at times like really connected to Kai, but then other times it felt like I was kind of like roommating with a stranger. Like it felt really weird. Like I was just roommating with a newborn, but we hadn't established a connection yet, if I'm being totally honest.
Hmm.
And I think there was like a mix of delirium, sleep deprivation, with like just the complete disbelief that Kai had come into the universe at the same time. Um, so yeah, the first 48 hours like were still part of the birth portal from my perspective. Like I feel like we hadn't really crossed over entirely. And then when we left the hospital in an Uber, because I had to take the car seat to the hospital, um, it was like a pretty smooth ride. I had to like figure out how to like fold the car seat and put it into like an SUV. So I had practiced on YouTube many times. So I was able to like fold up the car seat in like 30 seconds or so. So I felt very proud about that actually,
Yeah,
that I
good.
didn't delay the Uber ride. But yeah, we were cruising on the West Side Highway, which is on the west side of Manhattan. Beautiful day, 50 degrees in February, which is very weird. Um, and just sunny. And yeah, so and then once we like kind of got to our apartment, that's when I feel like okay, like Kai's home, he's here, and I felt my connection starting to build over the next few days. But the first 2 days were really a bit of a whirlwind and kind of like disbelief and you're so, I didn't feel like I was a father yet. I felt like I was just cohabitating with a newborn. Like it was really weird, like in the beginning, to be honest. And we had some visitors, and I think in retrospect, maybe too many visitors because we didn't really set strong boundaries because a lot of my family was here. They flew over, so if I had a part that was like, oh, if I set some boundaries, then it's like, why did they fly over here if they can't even see Kai?
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I would say that the first 48 hours were not the highlight for me. So,
Where they flew over, where'd they fly over from?
oh yeah, so most of my family lives in Miami.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
They flew up and over.
up and over.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about how often are in a big city like New York, you've got people strapping kids into Uber rides is probably pretty commonplace, is it not?
Yep. Yeah. Very common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
doubt about it.
Yeah.
I just love that. Is there a functionality inside of Uber? It's like um, freshly born newborn.
Mm.
It's
No, but
like,
they do have a car seat option, but the car seat option is for kids 2 and older. So you can order an Uber with a car seat already.
yeah, neat.
Uh,
That's great.
but yeah.
Little bit different lifestyle out in Colorado than the big city, the Big Apple. But tell me about your role as Jing's partner throughout this journey. What was it like to be supportive of her and attuned with her, and her co-pilot prior
Mhm.
to, and then what's it been like 30 days out? How's that
Yeah.
looked
Um,
for you and Jing?
so I feel during the pregnancy, I feel very proud that like we both kind of stepped into our own roles. So like in my case, I have the, you know, kind of training in naturopathy and in functional medicine. So, I was the one that largely chose our doula, chose like, you know, uh, our midwife practice. Like we knew that we wanted a vaginal birth, if possible. Like based on our initial consultations, there was no medical reason to get a C-section. Although because she's a little bit more petite, conventional wisdom, I put that in quotes because it's not very wise. Basically says like if you're petite, therefore you need to have a C-section, which is um, just medically not true.
Mm,
And so yeah, I was mainly supporting her through, cooking a lot, supplementation, and just making a lot of the decisions around like our midwife, around our doula. Um, we did several like kind of ceremonies where we unveiled it like kind of a gender reveal, but amongst ourselves, um, just at home because
the two of
it
you.
was yeah, just two of us just to find out, and so that was really beautiful. And did like pelvic floor therapy, like different types of breath work. So we kind of had like our own, rituals, self-care throughout the pregnancy. And it evolved, of course, because as you know, in like the third towards the end of the third trimester, you're not quite as active, can't do as much. Um, but so yeah, so I think I, was pretty supportive, went to all the appointments. Um, I actually came up with the name. Like, there's just things that like s- lean into my strengths a bit more. Like, I can sift through like thousands of names and then like narrow it down to a few others. And I had like two spreadsheets, and so that's sort of more my domain.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and then we just enjoyed ourselves too. We didn't go on like a baby moon, but we did like some road trips and had like a staycation over the holidays, and I feel really enjoyed it. And yeah, so I thought it was honestly, I felt the pregnancy was pretty smooth and enjoyable. I mean, for the most part, like we really kind of made the most of it. We had a fun like maternity shoot, did all sorts of cool stuff. Um, and then since, I would say that my role's been like a mixed bag. So one, we just moved into a new apartment. We did some renovations. We barely cut it off. It's almost like Kai was like in tune with what was going on in the 3D
Yeah.
world here, because I was praying that like the day that the movers came, because he could have come already then. I was like, please don't go into labor tonight. Like tonight is not the night because the
Yeah.
movers are coming tomorrow, and like this would be so awkward. Um, but it's been to like continue with the renovations and the housework. She can't do a lot of, especially the first 2 to 3 weeks. Um, she couldn't even like take out the trash, and I mean, she shouldn't. Like she probably could, but shouldn't. So I was mainly doing a lot of the very gender specific role, like typical male stuff around lifting and cooking. I read a book called The First 40 Days,
Mm.
which is basically all around postpartum nutrition. So I've been preparing a lot of meals around that. And yeah, that's been the main way that I've been supporting. And then there's, as far as like caring for Kai, we typically have, we have childcare overnight. So we have a nurse that we brought in from Mexico. And yeah, and then during our shifts, like we kind of alternate. I would say that Kai is currently with her a little bit more, just because he does prefer it, and she's breastfeeding, so there's just that preference. Um, but yeah, otherwise just kind of tuning in and making sure like little things like okay, like She has a lactation smoothie that I create for her every day. So I make sure to remind her to stay on top of that. And, she'll be like, oh, I didn't make a lot of, breast milk today. So I'll like look at all of her biometrics and make sure she has enough water, how her food intake is, you know, stuff like that. So that's been kind of the main ways that I've been supporting. And then, a lot of any of like the purchasing decisions for stuff for Kai, I'll usually take care of as well. Cause I'm just like, I'm a more decisive person, whereas she gets more paralysis when like sifting through a lot of baby stuff. And I'm like, no, just we're gonna do that and that's it. And so yeah, so that's pretty much been it apart from being a husband and a partner. Like that's been the bulk of it, I would say.
Yeah. And I know you can only speak from firsthand experience and in terms of how you support Jing and how it's going for you guys. But what do you feel like if you were to share some wisdom, share some advice with new dads? Like what's the
Mm.
how critical is it, or what's been the experience of Jing, the mama coming to fruition? What is it that we probably don't realize until our partners have gone through this transformative experience that you'd almost want to say, hey, heads up, be on the lookout, be ready, or take note of, that you think as a partner to guide Jing or to be
Yeah.
that co-pilot again. Like, what's the essence of that role in your estimation?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I would say that from my experience, the essence of this role is making sure that your partner's needs are being met. And I'm not only talking about physical needs, but that sometimes it could be that too. Like they may literally forget to eat. Like, Jing was not like a very parenty type of mom. Like, we, we're really clear on like the type of, she's more career oriented. Um, didn't really think much about breastfeeding, but she's brought in like once the motherhoodness or once the maternal instincts came online, she felt a lot of shame and like even anger if like she didn't produce enough breast milk. She'd feel like she's failed as a mom. So really um, having empathy for the way that your self-image or self-esteem may be tied to your ability to care for your child as a female, especially.
Wow.
And I didn't really appreciate that to the same degree because, from my perspective, I was just like, we're doing all the things. You're going to acupuncture to support your lactation. You have a lactation smoothie. We're following all the guidelines and we have like great formula. It's fine. Like, I'm certainly not putting any pressure, I think. And just really being aware that that pressure exists, checking in with your partner of like how they feel around their body because you know this really radical thing just happened in their in their womb, and check in with them of like how do they feel. um do they make sure that they feel beautiful, that they feel lovable still. Like make sure that you create some time for intimacy, even if it's like once a week for an hour on Thursday at 11 p.m. when the baby's asleep. Like just have some eye gazing. There has to be space for intimacy because many times you've already gone several months without having sex. I know some people have sex throughout the entire pregnancy, some people don't do it at all, but I'd say for the most part, intimacy tends to go down during the third trimester. That's just from all the parents that I know, at least. Um, so yeah, so there has to be other forms of intimacy because the first 2 months, or 6 weeks at least, you're usually not getting intimate. And on top of that, your partner may not feel very attractive and lovable anymore. And I think as you shift into the role of parents, I feel it's important that you still maintain your relationship and role as a couple. And sometimes that could get a little bit go to the back burner to some degree. And I
Wonderful.
think a little bit of just like, you know, uh, your partner feeling hot and sexy and attractive goes a long way. surprisingly. Like I think that's an aspect of postpartum self-care that goes really unnoticed. Like you can't necessarily accelerate them fitting back into their jeans, into their old clothes, but you may be able to make an impact on their level of satisfaction with where they are in this moment and being able to enjoy that ride and be like, hey, like change has happened. You're in this process, but you're still hot. I love you. Like I want to be with you. I want to touch you, um, and support you, because they're, stepping into this role and a lot of things have shifted, energetically and also physiologically for them. Another thing I would say is, checking in from time to time and everyone's birth story is a little different. Some are very epic, some are very straightforward, like a scheduled induction or a C-section, whatever. Either way, it's still a pretty powerful ceremony or portal, and having some space to process the calamity or just how significant of an event that was, the birth, because like there's all this buildup, during pregnancy, and then suddenly the birth happens, and then you're like trying to figure out like, oh, like breastfeeding, how does it work? Okay, what's their sleep schedule? How do you change a diaper? Like, what's the right diaper cream? So it's very easy to get lost in the minutiae of like day to day caring, especially if this is your first child. But whenever possible, whether it's like you invite, a caretaker or you have some family over and you really have some intentionality of like, how did you experience what we just experienced? Like, what was it like for you? Um, and being able to really process and just hold space because sometimes nothing comes up. But just, holding some space for like, what has unraveled for you since the birth? Like, how did that actually feel? How does your body feel? Like even somatically, is there any emotional quality to it? Because it's a huge event followed by huge responsibility, which blocks the processing of that huge event. So
Yeah.
it's a very weird dynamic because normally you would have a huge event and then you'd go back to life and you'd talk about it with your friends and if you have support, maybe go to some therapy or coaching. But this is the opposite. It's like you really have no space, if any, to process it if you don't make time. So I would say those are some of the two big ones.
And fascinating that this has occurred on planet Earth, billions of times. And
Yeah.
think about all the different experiences people have gone through that, were were overwhelming and transformative and hard to process. And it's just a fascinating thing. I see I see Mackenzie. Of course, I see her physical being, and I'm attracted to her. Uh, the way, and yes, her body has changed. Her you know uh, her whole physical um, her whole physical existence is definitely different than 5 years ago, different than a year ago. But now I'm attracted to what she is beyond her physicalness, right? It's like this,
Mhm.
you've generated life, and that's profound to me. And I find awe in that, and I really love. I don't know if I've sat down with her, and she shared with me a decent amount, and I love this idea of sitting down and asking these questions of what's the what's the experience like today, or what's the experience like, even though you were there perhaps for the birth, like, what was it like in those moments? Describe that to me. Just honoring those. I just wonder, we get caught up. There's so many other things to do. Are we actually, just listening to our partners? And one thing I want to highlight for anyone listening is how it's like the economics of breastfeeding, supply and demand, getting that rhythm, that there's got to be, biologically, there's the responsibility to provide and to fuel and to provide sustenance. And yet in the beginning, it's rough, possibly. It can be. And the female
Mhm.
body is learning to calibrate supply based on demand from Kai or Leonidas in our case. And it's not automatic necessarily. Mackenzie went through, she did some cranial sacral work, some acupuncture work. She got some adjustments. She was working on fueling her with a bunch of really good, yummy foods that a dear friend of ours came in about a month prior and made a bunch of great soups and bone broths. And we were able to tap into that early on to fuel her and give her that that robust nutrition. But the calibration between what Leonidas wanted and the body producing milk was uh, it affects the mental. It begs so many questions if it's not going perfectly well, and we can't exactly see what that's like or feel what that's like or know what that's like, but it has to be a large weighted sensation to be the one who's giving your kiddo sustenance, and yet not enough perhaps. Or is this what my baby needs right now? So good to have the objectivity of the father role in that mix. And hopefully you've been a nice steady, it sounds like you've been an incredibly steady co-pilot for her as she's learning her new self.
Yeah.
I want to read something. When I was learning a little bit about you in the last day or two preparing for this, I saw something you said on Facebook that said, I've spent years unraveling the person I thought I was. And there's a lot more to the reflection. And I'm wondering if bringing Kai into this world, how are you going to equip him? And this might touch on the beginning of our conversation, but how do you set him up for success so that there isn't necessarily a need to unravel himself, and yet he'll just have greater clarity by the time he's 25 than say I did or you did in his own
Mm.
ways. What are you getting at a little bit in terms of you unraveling your own self, and then how are you going to give Kai a little smoother path to those revelations that perhaps you stumbled upon eventually?
Yeah. Um, this is going to evolve, of course, because my understanding of childhood and developmental psychology is in the works. So it's an area of study I'm looking into. So this is kind of a nascent answer. But basically, I think it's creating a culture of curiosity in my family, and being one is like kind of having these reflections, like I talked about the conversations with Kai podcast, the observations, because I think a lot of self-help or a lot of my own journey has been being reminded about who I am. Like a lot of the answers are already there. It's like kind of a cliche, like the answers are already within you, which is
Mm,
true, but there's like a ton of shit blocking it, right? Um, so how do we remove those blockers? So one is I think giving him permission to be himself so that he doesn't have to adopt survival strategies to win over my love. So that's one big one I would say. Um, and kind of creating these various inflection points where you start to learn about yourself, like normalizing things like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs. Like I wanted to create a map for him around his physio and psycho bioindividuality. So I'm going to do like genetic tests on him. I'm going to like, if he chooses to, I'm going to be like, okay, based off of your genetics and based off of all this, this is the ideal diet for your body type. In Ayurveda, you're this type of body type. This works for you. This does not. Stuff like that. Like for example, I don't consume dairy products, but I had to find that out on my own. And then my mom told me actually like 2 weeks ago, she's like, "Oh
mm,
yeah, when you were a kid, like we had to mix it with soy milk because you couldn't handle milk." I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me that? Like that would have
yeah,
made it
right.
that would have made things a lot easier, maybe." Instead of me figuring that out on my own like 10 years ago. But so there's that. Yeah, and I think just encouraging, knowing yourself, really, and asking probing questions instead of, there's this kind of distinction in the type of speaking or types of conversations that exist in the world. There's chit chat, it chat, we chat, and me chat.
Mm.
And most people are basically doing chit chat and it chat. So it chat refers to talking about the news, external events, like, oh, this objectively happened out there,
Mm.
or this is true. And that's like most of our society, especially men, feel very comfortable with like facts and statistics and things that are outside of themselves. And you could talk about things in different ways. So you could talk about even a geopolitical event in terms of me chat, like saying like, oh, when I saw this happen on the news or in the world, it makes me feel this way, instead of projecting like this is the right way or what they are doing is wrong. Like that's so I think also being a person who models
Wow.
what it's like to speak to their internal experience and model what it's like to be emotionally fluent, I think is very important. And so that's one thing that I hope to impart to him, and also show him that like you can speak from various different perspectives, and there's a time and place for it chat. I'm not always going to talk about how like how I relate to something emotionally,
Sure.
um but being able to encourage that fluency within himself so he can shift from different modes in terms of ways of speaking, so he could see like, oh, there's like a collective experience, there's what's going on externally objectively, there's also my subjective experience of what's going on objectively, which is sometimes similar, but could also be very different. And then there's also the what's going on for the entire group, the collective nervous system of what's happening. And then there's obviously just kind of the surface level chatter. So kind of being able to, um, my hope is that at a probably by adolescence, being able to normalize these types of conversations through questioning, modeling it for him, and then probably even doing some like active education in, emotional intelligence of some kind.
Beautiful. And you said it
So
was chit chat, it
yeah,
chat, me chat, we chat.
yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah. So those are like simple categories to look at
Yeah.
it through. But
Yeah.
but yeah, you could take most of it. Like there's, you know, I don't know, like even a simple question of like, hi, how are you? Things like that, could be taken in different ways, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, so kind of, adding layers to how you relate to your children, and how you relate to yourself in front of your children. Because I feel like one of the things that was challenging was that, for me at least, and that lengthened the path a lot, is that, I think most people's fathers are like this, but my dad didn't really model emotional vulnerability or speaking to his own experience. He mainly resides in like, it chat, I would say, speaking about things outside of himself, not really about how they impact him or how he feels towards them.
Hmm.
So that was never really modeled to me. And yeah, I think that that kind of, delayed my own development to some degree, because I had to figure out like, oh, there's this whole other dimension to life that's not logical and rational, and it's emotional. And it's actually like 99% of everything, pretty much. So it's kind of weird that like we ignore this huge swath of existence, whereas almost everything is emotional. Even people that claim to be rational, exclusively rational, are themselves emotional.
Right.
So
I liked how you said emotional fluency, being able to actually speak to yourself about what you're going through, and then perhaps even speak it out loud to your friend, your confidant, your
Yeah,
partner.
and being able to like unpack the layers. So like for example, men are very, as men, we're typically comfortable with anger. Like anger is generally like a pretty accepted thing as a man. Like anger, joy, those are like the two, accepted modes of being, right?
Mm.
So being able to be like, oh, like actually something made me angry, but when I examine it further, I'm actually sad. I'm actually kind of hurt, something like that, like which sounds pretty basic. But being able to, let's say, as a adolescent, I think angry teenager, like that's like a very common euphemism, like, oh, they're like an angry, teenager.
There.
Most of the time they're wounded, sad teenagers, but they're, the only thing you see on the surface or that's felt on the surface is the anger. But usually there's something much deeper. So my hope is that through emotional fluency and creating a culture of, you could say vulnerability or emotional fluency, we're able to like kind of provide a map of like, oh, there's more things going on, and how do you have the tools to like navigate that within yourself? So
Power of language is incredibly powerful. It's a little redundant, but language is incredibly powerful when we can name something articulately, precisely, clearly. It lets
mm,
us let go of it potentially, or honor it, or incorporate it into the rest of our
mm,
existence, which is pretty special. I love how thoughtful you're going to be getting Kai to a place where he can feel whatever he needs to feel, acceptance of that. You as the dad accepting, hey, you're clearly upset. That's totally acceptable. What's really going on there? Tell me a little bit more. Tell yourself a little bit more. Process it. Don't just bask in the madness of the moment. That's going to be a
mm.
profound difference than perhaps the way kiddos were raised, a decade ago, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades ago, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thinking about raising Kai into this incredible leader, this incredibly capable, kind-hearted, courageous human being, what do you feel is going to be the critical characteristic attribute tied to leadership that you want to make sure, out of all of them, that you impart upon him?
Yeah, I think hmm, I think at this point, maybe this is a projection of my own experience, but I do feel that self-belief, and self-esteem are probably like one of the most important. This is, someone who, I didn't realize this growing up, but like I just had profoundly low self-esteem, like comically low self-esteem in retrospect. Like I, and so I think that, a big part of even manifestation is, do you believe it to be true? Like, do you believe you can actually achieve this, right? Otherwise, you're never going to achieve it. And as far as being a leader and believing in your ability to lead others or guide others in some way, shape, or form, I feel that you need to start with like kind of like, how do I feel about myself? Like, do I love myself? And and that doesn't mean just like you show up with like charisma. It could mean actually you're an introverted leader and you accept that like there's certain, like, yes, I'm a great leader, but I'm different. I show up a little differently than other leaders, and that takes a lot of courage too. Um, so the leader can be in many forms. You could also know yourself deeply and know that you're not into management, and that's cool too, and being able to say that. But I feel like developing healthy self-esteem and healthy confidence. I'm not talking about like superficial confidence that is actually, hiding a lot of wounds and not enoughness. But yeah, so I think that's going to be kind of the biggest challenge, and particularly because I'm raising a boy, really thinking about, there's a lot of things that I'm concerned about around, I had issues with addiction, and there's a lot of like video game addiction, and the picture for men or the is kind of bleak right now. Like men are generally underperforming in the world,
Mm-hmm.
for a variety of reasons. So I'm very cognizant of what those levers are. Um, and over time I'll think of probably specific ways to address them, of like what to expose them to, what not to expose them to, how we can create a design an environment that supports his development, in a way that would be conducive to that. But I think the crux of it is like having healthy self-esteem, and with that foundation, I mean, you can really go after pretty much anything.
I love that. The inner critic that we all have can get out of hand if we replace it with the inner blank. What is it? The inner champion? The inner, what is it?
I kind of like the inner ally. Like, I mean, because I'm more of a, I'm gonna lean more on like the analytical, kind of critical, like not over wildly optimistic side. So I would say like there's a role for this inner critic at times. Like, if you're not great at something, you should give yourself candid feedback and advice on how to optimize and improve. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, but it shouldn't be shaming. I think that's the main difference between the critic and the ally, is that it has this growth mindset. And one thing that I've read a little bit about growth mindset is really rewarding and incentivizing the effort over the label. So if you tell a kid like, "Oh, you're so smart, you're so fast, you're so athletic," what they're going to do, according to the research, is try and maintain that label. So they're going to challenge themselves less because that's going to lead to the maintenance of that label instead of rewarding the effort, which then actually improves performance over time because they're seeing that when they challenge themselves more, that's being incentivized as opposed to maintaining their original label. So a concrete example would be like, if I'm told I'm smart, I'm going to take less challenging classes because I'll always be the smartest kid in the room. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the best at the subject. It just means that I've maintained the label in this context. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how that plays out.
I love the growth
Um,
mindset. It's such a powerful
yeah.
school of thought, just the concept at large, and then the practical nature of what to do to guide our up and coming humans to be growth minded and convicted and resilient and all that. It's all tied into that. So, David, final question. I'm curious. Imagine you've moved on. You're in the ether of the universe, floating around above all of this, in
Mm,
all of this, above all of this. Kai is reflecting on his experience with you and Jing, but I want you to be specific to you. He's well into his older years, and he's thinking about his journey and his experience as a human being. What are the three things you hope to be known for when Kai describes you to a confidant sitting around a coffee shop or sitting around a campfire?
mm. Um, let's see. Yeah. So the first one I think is like curious. So really like someone who, was curious towards him specifically and encouraging of his own growth. Yeah. So kind of really kind of supporting him and being himself. So kind of having that curiosity to know him, but also teach him how to know himself. The other's wise. So I think that I don't say this about either of my parents. I don't my parents are great people actually, but I wouldn't consider either of them very wise. And I think that's a large part of my life has been around wisdom. And so I hope that, he's wise himself, but that, he would say that about me. And the reason I say that is because I think your kids have a window into your soul and a way of cutting through your bullshit that like nobody does.
Mm.
So so if he says I'm wise, then it's probably true. Um, and then the third one is hmm, I would say it's either like eccentric or whimsical, like kind of like, oh, like we just did a lot of weird stuff, like, just kind of out there, and which is definitely part of my personality. Like I am eccentric, like for sure. Um, but I hope like that's one of the kind of cultural attributes I want to have in my family is to invite weirdness and eccentricity.
Yes.
And I mean, he already sees me doing qigong in the morning. It's probably like that's going to be his normal, you know,
Yes.
and doing all the like these things that I do. So yeah, those would be it. I think wise, curious, and eccentric.
Beautiful. And knowing what I know about you, this probably falls into the eccentric perhaps, but he's going to be able to definitely say, wow, dad has style. Dad has style. David, thank you so much for pouring your heart out on Whoa
Yeah,
Dad, Go Dad, and just appreciate the candid nature of our conversation and being so fresh into the game that you shared your perspective with everybody listening.
I
And
really
it's
appreciate it.
clearly nighttime in the city that never sleeps, so we'll call it a
Yeah,
wrap. And I'll catch you on another one here soon. But thanks again, and I'll see you very soon in our fatherhood group.
yeah.
Thoughts
Thanks,
to
thanks for having me. See you soon. Bye, Dave.
absolutely. See ya. There you have it. That's been another episode of Whoa Dad, Go Dad. If you like what you're hearing, hit the like button, subscribe to the podcast so you get the future ones, and please spread the word and post this episode to your social networks. That's powerful. Perhaps the best thing you can do is share this directly with a new dad or a soon-to-be dad that you know personally. Let them know you're rooting them on. And indeed, drop a comment and be really a part of this dialogue on fatherhood with me. Let me know in the comments a question you want me to ask other dads, or just some feedback. How does this sound to you? What's helpful? What stands out about these conversations? I would appreciate that intel as I grow Whoa Dad, Go Dad. I've got many more episodes to come, and I'm so glad you're here. Looking forward to catching you on the next one.
Whoa, Dad, go Dad, here we go now. Oh yeah, the ultimate roll now. Oh yeah, here we go now. Whoa, Dad, go.